My parents moved into a new house without telling me, found out on Facebook with a post saying, "The family that built this together," and my sister commented, "So proud of us all." 2 weeks later, Dad asked for landscaping money, told him, "Ask your family." I found out my family moved into their new house from Instagram. Not a call, not a text, a post. It was a wide shot of a porch, pale blue siding, a wraparound deck, two hanging ferns, and above the door a wooden sign that read, "Home, finally home." In the photo, my dad, Mark Holloway, had his arm around my mom, Elaine, both grinning like they'd just been handed the keys to happiness. My sister Riley sat on the porch railing with their golden retriever in her lap. The caption said, "The Holloway family built this dream together. So blessed." Riley commented, "So proud of us all." I read that line again and again. Us. I wasn't in the picture. I wasn't mentioned. And I sure as hell wasn't proud. For the past 16 months, I'd been sending them $1,000 every month, almost a quarter of my income, because they said their roof was caving in and there was black mold in the basement. They'd said they were saving for a new place, and I believed them. But that house, that porch, that smiling family photo, that was the first I'd heard of it. I sat staring at my phone until the screen dimmed. Not a single private message, not even a "Hey, we finally did it." Nothing, just a public announcement that my place in their lives had quietly been written out. At first, it wasn't even about the money. It was the silence. The planning behind my back. The way they'd built something with my help, and then pretended I didn't exist. 2 weeks later, my dad showed up at my apartment with a reusable coffee cup and a fake smile. He said they were thinking about doing some landscaping, maybe a patio, maybe a fire pit. He wanted to know if I could help out one last time. I looked at him through the chain on my door and said, "You should ask your family for help." His face changed. His eyes hardened, and my mom started crying right there in the hallway like I was the one who'd done something cruel. I shut the door. They thought that would be the end of it, that I'd cool off, that I'd forgive quietly like I always did. But what they didn't know, what they could never have guessed, was that I already had proof. Every Zelle transfer, every text, every "Thank you, sweetie, we'll pay you back soon." And they definitely didn't know I had a plan forming. A plan that would burn a hole right through the shiny surface of their perfect family. Because if they wanted to erase me, I was going to make damn sure they remembered what it cost. It started simple, one desperate phone call on a rainy Tuesday. Mom crying so hard I could barely understand her. "Mark says the basement smells like mildew again. The inspector found black mold. We can't stay here, Addie. We can't." That was March 2023. I was exhausted from work, sitting in my car outside my apartment in Columbus, Ohio, listening to my mom break down. She said they'd found a fixer-upper, just needed a small down payment to get started. I didn't even hesitate. I said yes before she finished the sentence. Back then, I still believed family meant something. I was 28, renting a shoebox apartment, trying to climb out of student debt, but I still sent $1,000 the next morning. They said it was just for a few months, until the old place sells. It became a habit. Month after month, every temporary payment followed by another small crisis: the furnace, the roof, the closing costs. Sometimes my dad would call me our miracle. Sometimes my mom would text heart emojis. And sometimes my sister Riley would send photos of paint samples with captions like, "We're so close." They never said we were buying the new house together. But I thought I was helping build a home that included me. The truth is, I liked feeling needed. They'd always been a tight trio, ever since Riley was born. I was the oldest, the quiet one who moved out early and paid her own way. Riley stayed home through college, working at Dad's hardware store, always the golden child. When they needed money, suddenly I was part of the circle again. And I ate it up. Every "thank you," every "we couldn't do this without you." But as the months passed, things started shifting. Updates slowed down. Calls got shorter. Whenever I asked how the house search was going, they'd say, "Oh, still looking," or "We don't want to jinx it." Meanwhile, I was skipping dinners with friends, saying no to trips, watching my savings freeze in place while they got closer to somewhere new. I didn't realize I was being cut out until that damn Instagram post. The night I saw it, I scrolled back through every message, every transaction, trying to find the moment it changed, when I stopped being family and became funding. The worst part wasn't that they bought a house without me. It was that they'd done it together, smiling, united, complete, while I was out here paying rent on a one-bedroom that barely had space for a couch. I thought about all the times Mom said, "We'll pay you back once we're settled." And I finally saw it for what it was. A script. They'd rehearsed it so many times they could say it without guilt. That night, I decided I wasn't going to ask for the money back. I was going to make them feel what it meant to be erased. And soon enough, I'd get my chance, because when they came begging again, I already knew exactly how I'd answer. It was a Sunday afternoon in late May when they showed up. No warning, no text, just the buzzer ringing over and over. I opened the door a few inches, chain still on. Dad stood there with a coffee in one hand and a reusable grocery bag in the other. Like this was just some casual family drop-in, not the first time he'd seen me since their little Instagram announcement. "Hey kiddo," he said like nothing had happened. "Got a minute?" Behind him, the elevator doors slid open and Mom stepped out. Eyes red, makeup smudged. She didn't even meet my eyes at first. Dad cleared his throat. "We wanted to talk to you about something. We're redoing the backyard. Fence is falling apart, and we want to build a little fire pit, somewhere for the whole family to hang out." The words "whole family" made my stomach turn. Then he said it, the same line I'd heard too many times to count. "We were hoping you could help out just a little." I stared at him. He wasn't ashamed, not even awkward, just entitled. So I said, calm as ice, "Do it with your family, Dad." He froze. Mom gasped, tears starting immediately like she'd been practicing the scene. I didn't move. I didn't open the door any wider. He said, "Addie, that's not fair." I said, "Neither was what you did." He started to speak again, but I closed the door, slow, deliberate, locking every bolt. Behind the door, I heard Mom whisper, "She's changed." Dad muttered something I couldn't catch. Then the elevator dinged, and they were gone. I stood there for a long time, just breathing. That's when I realized something. They'd expected me to stay quiet, to keep being the daughter who paid, who forgave, who never said no. They didn't think I had it in me to fight back. They were wrong. That night, I pulled up my bank statements. Every transfer labeled clearly, house help, mold repair, down payment. I even had screenshots of Mom's texts. "You're saving us, honey. You're our miracle." They wanted to pretend this was all a misunderstanding. Fine. I'd show them what a misunderstanding looks like. I started gathering everything. Not for court, not yet, just for clarity. But the more I looked, the clearer it became that this wasn't bad communication or timing or some accidental oversight. It was intentional. They'd waited until they were secure, house keys in hand, walls painted, furniture delivered before cutting me out completely. And now they had the nerve to come to my apartment asking for more. I wasn't just done helping. I was done pretending. But I didn't know then that my silence, my refusal to play along, would trigger something worse. Because when narcissists lose control of the story, they don't apologize. They retaliate. And my parents were about to start rewriting the whole narrative, casting me as the ungrateful, cold-hearted daughter who turned her back on family. But before they could, I decided to stage a little scene of my own. By June, the story was already spreading. Little whispers from relatives, random texts from old family friends. "Your mom said you've been going through something." "Your dad told us you've been distant since the move." They weren't ashamed. They were building a narrative, the one where I was unstable, dramatic, selfish. The one that made them the victims. So I decided to give them something to really talk about. I called someone I hadn't spoken to since high school, Eli Ramirez. He'd become a cop in our hometown, and he owed me a favor. Years ago, I'd covered for him when his older brother totaled a car after a party. I'd kept quiet then. Now I was calling in that silence. I told him I needed something that looked official, just optics, nothing illegal. He hesitated. Then he said, "What kind of official?" "Asset recovery," I said. 10 minutes tops. The next week, Eli picked me up in his black Explorer. No sirens, no lights, just quiet authority. I wore a plain navy jacket and carried a clipboard. When we pulled up to my parents' new house, the one I paid for but wasn't welcome in, my heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. Eli gave me a look before we walked up the porch steps. "You sure about this?" I said. "I've never been more sure of anything." I rang the bell. Riley opened the door. The second she saw Eli's badge glinting under his jacket, her face went white. "What's going on?" she whispered. "Just a quick asset verification," I said like I'd rehearsed it. "Won't take long." Mom came down the stairs in slippers, eyes wide. Dad appeared behind her, holding his coffee like a shield. Everyone looked at Eli. No one looked at me. I didn't wait for permission. I walked straight down the hall to the master bedroom, opened the nightstand drawer, and pulled out a familiar fireproof envelope. The one Dad always kept his cash in just in case. I counted out $9,600. Every dollar documented, not a cent more. Eli stood in the doorway, arms crossed, looking bored like every real cop does when standing in someone else's house. Dad's voice cracked. "Addie, what the hell are you doing?" I didn't raise my voice. I didn't even look up, I said, taking back a fraction of what I gave. Mom started crying, begging, saying they would have paid me back eventually. Riley just stood there frozen, one hand on the banister, face pale. When I finished counting, I zipped the envelope, slipped it into my bag, and nodded at Eli. We left without another word. As the door closed behind me, I heard Mom whisper my name, not like a question, but like a prayer that came too late. That night, my phone exploded. Texts, emails, voicemails, "You've gone too far. We can fix this if you just talk to us. You're punishing the whole family over a misunderstanding." That word again, misunderstanding. They didn't get it. They still thought this was about money. But it wasn't. It was about being erased. And for once, I'd made myself impossible to ignore. What I didn't expect, though, was how quickly they'd fight back, or how dirty they'd get when the truth started closing in. Because just when I thought I'd gotten the upper hand, a message from an unknown woman landed in my inbox, and it changed everything I thought I knew about my family. It was late December when the message came. I was half asleep, scrolling through my phone, when I saw it, a request from someone named Lena Hart. At first, I thought it was spam. Her profile looked normal enough, a woman around my age, brown hair, kind face. Mutual friends, 0. Her message read, "Hi, Addie. I think we might be related. I did a DNA test a few months ago and your dad's name came up, Mark Holloway. Is that your father?" I froze. I didn't answer right away. Then she sent a screenshot, paternal match, half-sibling level. I just sat there, staring at it, phone trembling in my hand. It was like my lungs forgot how to work. Lena was 26. She lived in Indiana. Her mother, she said, had always told her that her father wasn't in the picture. She decided to take a DNA test over Christmas just to fill in the blanks, and that's how she found him. My dad, everything I'd been trying to make sense of, the distance, the secrecy, the way I'd been cut out, suddenly snapped into place. Of course I wasn't in the family photo. Of course they'd left me out of the new house, the porch, the post. They'd been rewriting their lives. And I didn't fit the new version. I printed the screenshot, highlighted the match, and mailed it straight to their new address. No note. No explanation, just truth. 2 days later, the phone started ringing. Mom first. "We were going to tell you," Dad next. "This doesn't change anything, you're still our daughter." That one word still told me everything. They'd known. For years, and rather than face it, they'd built a house, staged a photo, and erased me to make room for the lie. For days, I replayed every conversation, every time my dad went on a work trip, every time Mom said she didn't want to talk about the past. It wasn't just betrayal. It was a full-on rewrite of my existence. So I did what I do best, I planned. I wasn't going to scream or post or humiliate them. That would make them victims again. No, this time, I was going to let the truth rot their story from the inside. First, I sent Lena every financial record I had, the Zelle receipts, the messages, the Instagram photo. I told her everything. How they'd built the house with my money, how they left me out, how my dad had pretended to be a devoted husband and father while hiding an entire daughter. She didn't defend him. She didn't even seem surprised. She just said, "He always seemed like the kind of man who builds things to hide behind." That line stuck with me. A week later, I heard from Riley, my golden child sister, for the first time in months. She texted, "Did you really send them that? The DNA stuff?" I said, "Yeah, truth's overdue." Then she showed up at my apartment. No warning, no anger, just confusion. She wanted to see proof, so I showed her everything. The statements, the messages, the test. Riley didn't cry. She just stared, jaw tight, hands shaking. Then she said quietly, "You know this is going to destroy them." I said, "Good, they built it wrong." But what I didn't know yet, what I couldn't possibly have seen coming, was that there was one more secret buried under all of this. Something even Lena didn't know. And when it came out, it would make everything, the lies, the money, the exclusion, look like child's play. 3 days after I showed Riley the DNA results, she sent me a photo. It was the Holloway's backyard, the same dead, patchy grass I'd seen before, but now there was a metal sign hammered into the middle of it. Private property, no trespassing. No caption, no emoji, just a message. I laughed so hard I almost dropped my phone. They weren't just cutting me off, they were declaring war. But then Riley called. Her voice was shaking. "You need to see something." She came to my apartment that evening with a folder of old documents she'd found in Dad's desk. She said Mom had been panicking lately, going through drawers, shredding papers at night. Inside were old tax forms, insurance statements, and something else. A birth certificate, not Lena's, not mine, a third one, a name I'd never heard before, Oliver James Holloway, born 1997, died 1999. I felt my stomach drop. Riley said quietly, "Mom told me he was my cousin when I was little. I didn't remember until now." Oliver wasn't a cousin. He was my parents' first child, the one before me. And from the looks of it, his birth had been during one of Dad's so-called separation years, when he was living away for work. The mother listed on the certificate wasn't my mom. I just sat there staring at the name, at the dates, at the ink that proved my dad's lies went back decades. Riley whispered, "Mom knew, she's always known." Everything started spinning in my head, Lena's message, my dad's distance, the perfect little family image they'd tried to project. They'd built that house not to celebrate something new, but to bury something old. A whole grave of secrets, layered in drywall and paint. And suddenly, things clicked in a way that made my skin crawl. The timeline didn't add up. Lena wasn't some random mistake from a drunken night decades ago, she was born the same year I was. Which meant, she and I weren't just half-sisters, we were twins. Dad had split himself between two women that year, two families, two versions of the same life. Mom found out. She didn't leave him. She built walls instead, literal, suburban, white-painted walls, and filled them with silence. That's why she'd been so desperate to move. That's why they'd kept me out of the new house. Because it wasn't about starting over. It was about sealing the past behind a front porch and a Facebook caption. Riley sat on my couch, whispering, "He's never going to tell the truth. Neither of them will." I nodded slowly. "Then we'll make them." She didn't ask how, she just said, "Tell me what you need." And that was the first time in years I didn't feel like I was fighting alone. When you spend your whole life thinking your parents are just messy, flawed people, and then you realize they're calculating, it changes how you breathe. The week after Riley found the birth certificate, she called Mom, put it on speaker. I didn't say a word, just listened. Mom's voice was soft at first, like she already knew what we'd found. Then she said the sentence that made my blood go cold. "We weren't trying to hurt you girls. We were trying to fix what your father broke." Riley asked, "You knew about Oliver, about Lena?" Mom said nothing for a full minute. Then, "We thought if we built something new, if we started fresh, it would cancel out what happened." The house was supposed to be a clean slate. I felt sick. A clean slate bought with my money, my trust, my silence. She said Dad wanted to get it right this time. That the new house, the new neighborhood, the new image, it was all part of turning the page. "Turning the page," I snapped. I couldn't hold it in anymore. "You lied. You let me bankroll a life that didn't even have room for me in it." Mom's voice cracked. "We couldn't have both, you and her. It was too complicated, you'd never understand." I said, "Try me." And that's when the final piece dropped, the reason that made everything, every cruel decision, make sense in the worst possible way. Lena wasn't just my dad's other daughter. She was his heir. The land that the new house was built on, the one they'd been bragging about online, came from Lena's mother's family. When her grandmother passed, she left a piece of property in her will. Only one condition, that Mark Holloway's acknowledged child be listed as part of the deed. That's why they moved so fast. That's why they bought in secret. That's why they erased me from every photo. They weren't celebrating a new beginning, they were covering up a legal trail. Mom knew it. Dad orchestrated it. And they both used my money to make it happen. I sat there in silence while Mom kept talking about how it was just business, not personal. How everyone had to make sacrifices. Riley hung up before I could say what I was thinking. But I knew in that moment, they hadn't built that house for us. They'd built it for him to save his reputation, his name, his inheritance. And I'd funded every square foot of it. I wasn't angry anymore. I was something colder. Something that didn't want an apology or revenge in words. I wanted impact. Because if they thought they could build a house on lies, I was going to make sure everyone saw the cracks. I kept thinking revenge would feel like fireworks, loud, showy, quick. It wasn't. It was slow and precise, like a surgeon's cut. First thing I did was stop pretending this was about money. The envelope I took, that was theater. It got their attention, sure, but the real engine was the paper trail I had. 16 months of transfers, texts that read like a timeline of manipulation, and the screenshot Lena sent me. I made copies. I organized everything so a stranger could read it and understand what my family had done without needing my grief as a translator. I didn't post anything online. I wasn't trying to ruin them for sport. I wanted something cleaner. Accountability that couldn't be rewritten into a sad bedtime story. So I did 3 things, one after the other. First, I sent a single, carefully worded email to every person who had liked that Instagram post. The cousins, the old neighbors, the aunties who commented hearts. It wasn't accusatory. It was factual, a timeline, names, dates. You might want to know the full story, I wrote. I attached select screenshots and bank transfer evidence. People forwarded the email. People started asking questions. Second, Lena and I hired an estate attorney to review the deed situation. Her grandmother's will meant the property had conditions, sure, but the paperwork was sloppy, and the signature trail had gaps Dad couldn't explain away. We didn't sue for spite. We filed a quiet demand for clarification and an audit of how the deed had been executed. That kicked up legal dust and made them nervous in a way Instagram never could. Third, I met them where they thought I wanted to be, the dinner table. Not to charm them, not to beg, to watch. I wore the sapphire pendant I'd bought with the money I'd taken out of their nightstand, a private, almost ridiculous monument to the transaction they'd hidden from me. They noticed the stone the second I walked in. Dad's hands tightened. Mom's smile faltered. Riley kept touching her throat like she needed to make sure hers was still there. I spoke plainly. I told the story not for them, but for the cousins, the friends, the aunties who were in the group chat and getting forwarded documents. I told them about Oliver and Lena and the deed and how I'd been treated like an invisible bank. I let them hear the sequence of dates. I let them hear recorded voicemails where Mom promised to pay me back once we were settled. I let them hear the voice of the woman whose DNA proved Dad's other life. They tried to gaslight me at first, the reflexive family defense. But gaslighting doesn't hold up when the legal letters start arriving and neighbors start asking uncomfortable questions about the private property sign planted in the dead yard. When the church ladies called to say they'd seen copies of my email, when relatives texted, "Is there any truth to this?" The story they'd been shaping collapsed into patchy denials and half-pleas. Their landscaping plans were quietly canceled. The patio furniture sat in boxes. The fire pit never got built. The house was suddenly expensive maintenance with a scandal attached. People stopped liking their photos. Conversations at family gatherings pivoted away from small domestic victories and toward "Did you hear?" I didn't want them angry. I wanted them honest. I wanted a life where my name couldn't be excused away with a smile or a Facebook caption. In the end, the deed review forced them to disclose a chain of ownership they hadn't planned to make public. They had to sign paperwork, appear before a notary, explain a routing of funds. They couldn't pretend they'd always been open and loving when there were records to the contrary. Riley texted me later that spring. She cried last night. Not for the house, for what we lost first. I didn't gloat. I didn't celebrate. I sat on my couch, unboxed the sapphire, and felt a small, useful peace. The kind that comes from making reality match the truth you've been carrying. They told others I'd cut them off and stolen from them. Lena sent me a photo of her and me the next week. 2 faces in a selfie, awkward smiles that felt like the start of something less broken. I forgave them in the only way that mattered. I let go of needing them to call me family. I reclaimed my story and the money I'd given them, but more importantly, I reclaimed the narrative of who I was. I walked away from the staged porch photos and their private property signs and never looked back. The last time Dad texted me, he wrote, "Can we try to be a family?" I replied with 3 words that weren't mean, just true. Not like before. Then I deleted the group chat and bought myself a weekend trip I didn't have to split with anyone. The house on the hill still looks pretty in filtered photos. But every time I scroll past it now, I catch myself smiling, because the prettiest thing they built was never their porch. It was the long trail of receipts that finally told the truth. And truth, unlike paint, doesn't wash off.